What's going on, everybody? Chris here, hanging out with our influencers. And tonight we are continuing our discussion on the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. So I'm curious, guys, what questions do we have? What are we thinking? What stood out to you?
I just kind of wanted clarification on the part where it's like the yeast of the Pharisees and the Herod. There's two parts. So it's in verse 15 where it's talking about, "Beware," said Jesus sternly to them, "watch out for leaven Pharisees, leaven, and Herod's leaven too." And then I was confused about basically the rest. Like the end, it's like, "You still don't get it." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't." Explain it.
So leaven and unleavened bread, do you know what that is?
Unleavened bread is crackers, and leavened bread is
Hawaiian rolls.
Yeah, Hawaiian rolls. So any bread that has yeast mixed in it to help it rise is leavened. Bread baked without yeast and it doesn't rise is unleavened.
And so the yeast is the active ingredient that works within the bread to make it become what it is. Fun fact, Passover, they celebrate Passover with unleavened bread because they didn't have time for the bread to rise when they were escaping Egypt.
I'm still confused as to why we're being aware of people's bread. Like, why are we looking out for Harold's bread?
All right, so you got to read it in context. So what story happened right before it?
They were giving out all that bread to like the people listening to Jesus.
Right, so they fed 4,000 guys and then women and children. So like a bunch more people. And then what's the first verse of this one? Verse 14.
It says, "They had forgotten to get any bread and had only one loaf with them in the boat."
And then Jesus is like, seriously? Like, but they're like, oh, crap, guys. There's like 13 of us and one loaf of bread. I guess we're going to starve.
I also think it's fun that was even like the remix. I mean, it was like, he's already done, this was the second time that he did this. And they're still like, oh man, what are we going to do?
Is that why Jesus is like, "You still don't get it? I can make a lot of bread out of one bread"?
Yes.
Oh, but then what about the part where he says, "Watch out for leaven, the Pharisees' leaven and Herod's leaven too"? How does that
Good. All right, so what could that mean? Because that's an addition to just, seriously. All right, here, let me read it with some energy of what might be happening, and let's see if this happens. So just fed 4,000 people, really more like 12,000 people, 4,000 men. It was awesome, cool stuff, but also everyone's fed and you're probably tired, right? Have you ever like hosted dinner for like 4 people? Imagine 12,000. Okay, good. You just fed a football stadium. And then the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. Because after that, what you want is questions. To test him, it's even worse, they ask him for a sign from heaven. Now, what's weird about that?
He is the sign from heaven.
He is the sign from heaven, and he just fed 12,000 people. You were here. You saw Jesus sighed deeply. And said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left and he got back on his boat and he crossed to the other side.
And then the disciples say, "Oh man, we forgot bread."
Yeah, so if you read it without the section, so they got it back, crossed over the bread. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread except for one loaf and they had on the boat, and they said, "Be careful," Jesus warned them. And then watch out, because Jesus is like, hey, you're worried about the wrong crap again, just like these Pharisees that we just left. Like, focus up, guys.
And so to go back to your question, Kerrigan, you have to look at leaven. He is using that as a metaphor to what happened with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the like strictest, most fundamental group of Jews in that day. And Herod came from a sect of Judaism that the Romans really liked because they could make them do stuff that were just like, hey, eat, drink, and be merry. It's all good. And so Jesus is saying, hey, look out for these mindsets because these are the ones that don't want to look out for other people and are just looking out for their own good. So you have to think of that leaven, that yeast of Herod as a mindset, and the yeast of the Pharisees, the leaven of the Pharisees, as a mindset.
What is the active ingredient helping you shape everything else happening here? What is the yeast?
Would Jesus' yeast be faith? The Pharisees have their yeast metaphor. Would Jesus's yeast metaphor just be to have faith and I'll give you bread? Or have faith and I'm able to provide for you?
Maybe all of that? Is your mindset one of Jesus is the Messiah? Or is your mindset one of like the world of scarcity and I got to get mine and the rules of earthly rules instead of heavenly rules like we talked about before?
And if you start to put some of context in here, like in the past, we've heard Pharisees get mad at Jesus saying that he's eating with sinners. You know, most rabbis would come into town, would only eat with the most honored people in their synagogues. You know, it's one thing to speak to people and to teach them, it's another thing to eat with them. And so he just fed 15,000 people. I can guarantee you in that town, those 15,000 people weren't all the most honored people in town. And so what you have to read between the lines is now the Pharisees are coming in and saying, when they say, I demand a sign, you obviously aren't doing this for God since you're doing it for sinners. So who are you doing this for? And that's when Jesus is like, good grief, you know, I'm trying to love people and y'all are asking me what demon am I doing this for? I mean, is effectively what he's saying. And then that's why he turns to the disciples and says, guys, it's easy to get caught up in this stuff. But if you look around in our culture, you know, there are other people that, you know, that are hardcore Republican, hardcore Democrat, hardcore, you know, whatever their mission is, and they get so involved in that and it becomes so self-centered they can't even see the forest for the trees sometimes, and that they miss out that instead of trying to love people and promote truth, they've turned it into being right and other people being wrong.
In Mark, the disciples are seemingly almost always the example of like they're around, they should be getting it, and they're just not getting it yet. And all of the people who shouldn't be getting it, the outsiders, the outcasts, the nobodies, get it. So even the ones who Jews like didn't even hang out with get it and get healed and have faith, and Jesus like forgives their sins. So it's a really interesting thing of like the disciples who should be getting this aren't yet, and yet everyone around them seemingly is, besides like the religious leaders who are a little stuck in their ways.
That brings up another question. I have such a hard time believing some of the miracles in the Bible like this, where he just like heals people like in an instant. But like he did that, right? Like the dude has vision and he did it before, like that's like a thing. Or like I also know that like a lot of the time the miracle is metaphorical, but how much is like Jesus likes to teach in metaphors, but like would they write a miracle as a metaphor? Would that even make sense to do? Or do you think it was like literal? Like I know Jesus performed miracles, but like I think I don't know if I mentioned it that one time, but like when he was breaking the bread, I thought it was like I heard an interpretation where like the breaking the bread was really people coming out with like their own bread and like sharing. So really the miracle was like generosity and not so much like bread appearing out of nowhere. So I'm curious, like if that's the case, how much of that interpretation would apply to other miracles too? Like I just have a really hard time wrapping my brain around somebody performing a miracle, which I know that's like literally what Jesus does. I just like
A lot of times the gospel differentiates between the metaphors and the miracles by calling them parables. And so the parables would be more of the metaphorical, like it's kind of like this, like storytelling. Whereas the miracles are told as if this is what happened. Now, their understanding of science is different than our understanding of science. But I have all the faith that Jesus, as God, could do everything as written. I think miracles are definitely things people struggle with. Like, I think it's a completely fair question. Because then it bodes the question, why aren't we feeding 4,000 people with a loaf of bread now? Or are we, and it just looks different? I don't know.
We don't have magical finger guns that can separate bread. Like
Is
when
is that how he did
That would
it?
be so cool.
that's how I imagine he goes pew pew pew.
Bread,
pew, and they just
bread. You get some bread, and you get some bread.
Did
I-
Oprah learn this from Jesus?
Oh my goodness, she might have.
That's awesome. I do think it's I think it's interesting that we are having this conversation right after the last one. You know, in our family, we've talked about this. So M's been a part of this conversation, but one of my kids, I can't remember which one, you know, they heard someone say, God spoke to me and said, and their next question was, why has God never spoke to me that way? And so, you know, we got to have the conversation, me as a follower of Jesus, who is in my mid 40s, you know, I chose to follow Jesus when I was almost 16 years old. And since that time, I can count on one hand. There's probably been 3 times where through the Spirit, you can physically, spiritually sense a message coming to you. People that say that they get those all the time, I have a hard time trusting that. Okay, but there have been 3 clear times in my life where that has happened. You know, over the course of my times of following Jesus, I have seen one exorcism. Okay, there was no other way for me to experience that. Over the course of my life, I've been privy to 2 miracles, and that's over a course of 3 decades. And so, those things that you haven't experienced yet, I think this is where Jesus says, hey, you're always asking for a sign. Don't lean into that. Look at how you can love people. You'll see those other things. You know, it's funny that the disciples said we only have 1 piece of bread. And at that point, he's like, you've missed 2 points. We just loved on 15,000 people. That's 1 point you missed. And then 2, you just missed that I could do that I could break it and make more bread. So just know that it's okay. You know, the vast majority of times you're going to hear from God, it's going to be through other people. It's going to be through the word. Here's another thing. If our call is to love people and to not ask for signs, we as Americans that have more money than anyone and resources than anyone else in the world has ever had, guess who doesn't need to break clothes? So he's just saying, take what you already have and give it to other people. When you don't have that, I'll start providing in those ways. And so that makes it harder for us on the faith spectrum in that we don't live in parts of the world where the only option is miracle. But then it also helps us not to view what we have here as, I mean, imagine people in the other part of the world where they say, hey, there's this land where they always have food, they always have clean water, they always have a roof over their head, they always have medicine, they always have these things. Those people are going to be like, where is that magic land? And so, you know, no matter where you come from, there's always something that you want from somewhere else. And that's what Jesus is saying. Hey, don't get so lost in that you forget, hey, we just loved on all those people. And it doesn't make and I don't want to belittle the question, Kevin, because I completely understand that. And it's easier for me as a person that's in my mid 40s that has seen things that can't be explained to accept the things that can't be explained. And I trust in your lifetime, you will see those things. Just know it's not like an everyday experience. But there are those experiences you'll have that you're like, okay, what just happened made no sense. And no one can explain it. My sister was just to give an example, one of my youngest sisters was in a car wreck going 65 miles an hour, wearing no seatbelt on a rainy day, went off of a curve and the car wrapped around the tree. They didn't know she was in the car for over an hour because she was crumpled up in the floorboard and the transmission had come up over her and had covered her. So she gets rushed to the hospital. They take x-rays. They come to my mom. They're like, you know, we don't think we're going to lose her, but she is going to be in surgery for the next 16 to 18 hours. So you just need to settle in. And the doctor came back out in 2 hours and he even said, we don't know what just happened, but all the things that were on the x-rays are fixed. Not all of them. They had to do a few things, but they said her whole facial skull looked like corn chips just from all of the fractures and breaks. on the x-ray, and they go in there and it's solid again. So that's just one example. Do I think my sister is better than anyone else? Why did God show grace and mercy on her in that time when she was clearly breaking the law and not doing things that she needed to do? I don't know, but I'm thankful for it. And I trust you'll see those things one day, and it'll make these passages a little bit easier. But just know at the same time that Jesus is saying, hey, don't get caught so much up in that we're missing what the real point is. And that's feeding all those people was a loving act. They were probably there and they were all hungry. And so Jesus was like, all right, they're not going to be hungry. I'm going to take care of that. Again, that's not to belittle the question at all. Just trust those of us that have been around a little bit longer, and you begin to see those things and experience them. And then that makes the word open up in a completely different way. But it also makes you a lot more, if you're approaching it the right way, humble, in that it's like, oh man, this is way bigger than I realized that it was. And I'm way smaller than I realized that I was.
Oh, and also the Peter thing too, actually. It says you are the Christ, and he strictly charged him to tell no one about it. What does that mean?
So that goes back to like that Messiah secret, right? Messianic secret. That's what it is. So remember, Mark is all about who is Jesus. Who do you say Jesus is? So Jesus is the Messiah. So he's doing a lot of things, telling the story to let people know, like, no, he's the Messiah, he's the Messiah, he's the Messiah. And then I think it's in this chapter where they actually ask, who do you say that I am?
Yeah, it's 27.
It is in this chapter.
Yeah. So that's like the pinnacle of Mark. That's really what Mark is asking us. But then that secret part is, if word gets out who Jesus is to the wrong people too fast, it's all over. So it's like a weird balance of almost like the guy, like, yeah, don't give me like 10 minutes, but it's like, give me some time to teach you before all this goes down, because it's gonna go down, but not how you think it is. Because everybody kept expecting Jesus to come in, white sword, army, take back the holy city.
Also, but I think that's also why there's the secret. I mean, it's a very loving thing there, because if he comes right out and says, I'm the Messiah, there are tens of thousands of people that are ready to pick up a sword and go put him in as the leader of Jerusalem. For Jesus to be like, one, that's not my path. Two, not wanting all those people to suffer and the deaths that would come from that. It's big.
So he's sort of buying time to help reframe what in the world all this is. So maybe this chapter is just called Give Me 10. We've rewritten Mark 8.
Chapter 8, give me 10.